I can tell you that when we had our first kid, I was really glad that I went with Sarah. They had these birth preparedness classes because I was in no way, shape, or form prepared for what was about to happen. I had all the wrong kind of expectations because, see, I'd seen, in movies, they sometimes have, the childbirth scene. And so my idea of what birth would be like would be that she'd wake up in the middle of the night, we'd rush to the hospital, there'd be a few minutes of yelling, and then the baby. And I was so glad I went to the class because they said, look, you've got to adjust your expectations. And even then, I don't know if I was really ready for the hours and hours and hours that would follow. Of course, Sarah was there too. See, she was prepared. She knew what it would take to get through. In fact, we actually had a close friend of ours, and it was one of the things that she did was go with women through childbirth. And so we not only had training ahead of time to go into it, we had someone there along with us cheering her on. Sometimes when we talk about forgiveness, I think we have the wrong idea of what sort of a process it is. We imagine perhaps a conversation. Maybe one like you had with your mom when you did something and she had the pinch of death on your shoulder or ear, and she grabbed you and your sibling and she sat you down and you look at each other and you say, I'm sorry, I forgive you. And you walk away and 20 minutes later you're fighting again. So we wonder, if I've said I've forgiven this person, why do I feel angry when I see them again? If I've made the decision to forgive, why do I keep having thoughts about what happened? You might say, well, Pastor Aaron, that's nice what you keep saying about what's happened with those people in Rwanda, but I haven't seen that in my life. It just doesn't seem to work for me. Or maybe we think the end goal of forgiveness is basically to get to a point where I no longer want to harm the person or slash their tires or kick them in the shins. Now, God desires for His children to live in peace. And so we have to understand, not only can forgiveness take a very long time, but the end goal, a lot of times we cut it short just saying, well, we don't want to have negative feelings anymore. Psalm 85, verse 10. I love this. It says, righteousness and peace kiss each other. If you want to live a righteous life in God, you are called to pursue peace. Now, peace in the Bible is not just, again, the absence of fighting, and I say this a lot. Peace is wholeness. The most in-depth look we're given in the Bible at forgiveness is a very messy, drawn-out affair. The story of Joseph. I love when the Bible presents characters in the raw reality of their lives, and it doesn't gloss over their struggles or their failures. So Abraham's grandson, Israel, ends up with 4 wives and 12 sons. You can see where the problems might begin there. It's a long story, but here's where it picks up in Genesis 37. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. And so they have this failure to resolve conflict. They have a lack of peace. And it gets worse. Now, it doesn't make things any better when Joseph begins telling his brothers that, oh, I have dreams of you bowing down before me, and mom and dad included. So Joseph and his brothers are out in the field, and they find him, they grab him, and they throw him in a pit, and they decide, well, we're not going to go all the way and kill him. We're going to sell him to some slavers who take him to another country, and they sell him to an Egyptian. And Joseph ends up getting falsely accused and thrown into jail and forgotten for several years. And he never complains, which I think is amazing. Because, I mean, we've all been around people who can't endure the microwave taking too long without complaining. And Joseph, in all of these circumstances, does not complain. Now, most people think of Joseph, again, as having this incredible attitude through it. And again, when he gets to the end, he looks back and says, God was working through all of this. However, Joseph was human. And we get a glimpse of this when he names his kids. So this is years and years later. And after God rescues him out of the jail cell, here's what he names his kid. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, meaning forgetful, and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble in all my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim, meaning twice blessed, and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." All these years later, Joseph is still not really gotten over what happened to him. I mean, think about it. If you met somebody and they introduced you to their kid and said, "Oh, this is my son Dis, short for dysfunctional, like my relationship with my father," you might begin to wonder, like, there's some things you haven't really healed from. And yet, God works his plan. Joseph is put into this position where he's second in power in the entire country, only to Pharaoh himself. God brings a famine. And through this famine, God works three things. One, he puts Joseph in his position to save the lives of the Egyptians. Joseph brings about a plan that will get them through the famine. Number two, God brings Joseph's family to Egypt. He and his brothers become the 12 tribes that would become the nation of Israel. And yet, three, even all of this big-scale stuff that God is doing, he brings about the healing of Joseph's relationship with his brother. See, sometimes we pray for the big things like Hurricane Irma and, oh man, are we going to go to war soon? And God cares about those things deeply. But he also takes time to bring about those situations that give us opportunities for peace. So the brothers, the same ones that threw Joseph in a pit and sold him as a slave, they have to come to Egypt because it's the only place that has food. And there they find the brother. Genesis 42. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him. I bet you found that ironic, with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Now what follows really bugged me for a long time, Joseph's interactions with his brothers, because he sees them and he recognizes them, but he doesn't say, "Oh, it's you guys, I'm so glad to see you. Look, I'm like rich and famous and powerful now. It's really been good, and I forgive you guys, and all, let's hug." He doesn't do that. In fact, what happens is, in fact, sometimes I've heard the story of Joseph, and they just skip to the end where he does forgive. But this is important because what Joseph does, his initial reaction, he accuses his brothers of being spies and throws them in jail for 3 days. Now, let's be honest. Do you wish that you had that power over some people in your life? How would you handle that? You might think, well, I know a few people who wouldn't be hurt by a few days in jail. Maybe he's thinking of the time they left him in the pit. Let me tell you, don't be surprised in your life, even if you've made the decision to forgive someone and then you hit a setback. Forgiveness is a journey, it is a process, and it begins with the decision to forgive, and it travels all the way to that full restoration of the relationship. And sometimes we're more on this side of it than the other. We have those times, yes, you make the decision to forgive someone, but it may take a very long time for your emotions to follow. Sometimes people say, well, I'm not going to forgive him because I don't feel like it. If you're waiting to only follow God when you feel like it, you're not going to do much following at all. And so Joseph, he's not there yet. And as we've been following through these stories of forgiveness in Rwanda, they have this genocide, and then the murderers are released from prison back into the villages. In all of those accounts, it takes significant time. The groups that formed where the survivors could sit and find comfort in healing with each other and even allow the killers to come in and confess to them and seek their forgiveness, that was a years-long process. It wasn't as though the killers come into the village and they're like, oh, we're going to have a barbecue. And everybody sits down, and after one conversation, nobody ever has problems in the villages again. Because that's not what real life is like. With Claude, the young man who had a grenade tossed into his home and just blew up his childhood and was so bound up in bitterness that he attempted to do the same in revenge. Understand that it took months and months. He is living with a group, a community of people whose sole purpose is to help him get over it. And it took months. He was living at one point with a group of 15 orphans he was responsible for. And it just took a long period of time. Gehigi, the pastor who went into the jails, preaching the gospel, knowing what God required of him, he still struggled for months with the thoughts of revenge and hatred towards the people that had harmed him. Remember Severi and Rosaria, the two people we started this series with, how Severi had gone to Rosaria and confessed his crime. I killed your sister and her children. And in that meeting, he received what was totally unexpected. Rosaria said, I forgive you. And yet, for many months after that point, Rosaria had forgiven him. And yet she found herself struggling to trust him again. Maybe you've been there. She said, well, I've forgiven him for the things that he's done in the past, but I find it difficult to trust him now as he says that he's changed. I find it hard to believe he's even saying that he wants to do good things for me. Forgiveness is a path from broken beginnings to full peace and restoration. It will take you more than a single conversation to get there. That's where Joseph was. So he puts them in jail. His brothers say this to each other. They said to one another, surely we're being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us. Now, they don't understand that Joseph can understand their language. They think he's some random Egyptian official. And God allows Joseph to see what many of us never get a chance to see. He gets to see that his brothers have not stopped thinking about what they did to him for years. And you can tell it's so fresh in their minds that the instant something bad happens, they begin fighting each other. Because that moment, that image of him in the pit and pleading with them for his life to be spared, they have relived that and recounted that. I bet you they had a fight before they left to get food. Saying, you know why this happened? God's judging us because of Joseph. They get a flat leg on the donkey on the way up. And they're like, oh, you know why this happened? It's because of Joseph and what we did to him. Anything that happened, I'm sure that they're saying, we deserve this, we deserve this. And so Joseph had not heard this yet from his brothers. And that's why I believe he had such a hard time getting to the point of forgiving them. all those years he had suffered, he had no idea if they were regretting it or like, man, that was the best thing we ever did. Maybe we should get rid of some more brothers. And he gets to hear that they confess their wrongs, they express remorse, even if it's indirectly. Now Joseph at this point, he could have revealed himself and said, oh God, you're so sorry. I hear you, come on, get out of jail. I'm just kidding, guys. No, he leaves him there. 3 days. And then he starts to play games with them. He says, all right, well, I'm going to give you food, but I think you're spies. So he takes one of the brothers and just puts him in jail. And so I'm going to hold him in prison until you prove you're not spies. Bring your youngest brother, Benjamin, who Joseph was closest to. Bring him back to me. I'm going to keep him in prison until you do. And then he sends them out with the food, but he puts their money back in the bags. Now, when the brothers discover this, they're really terrified. Their hearts sank and they turned to each other trembling and said, what is this that God has done to us? I believe that Joseph wanted to make them afraid. Because now they think the Egyptians are going to figure we're thieves and spies. And Joseph is wondering, will they abandon another brother behind? Joseph was forgotten in jail. He just forgot he was there. Will his brothers do the same? Now they're forced to come back when their food yet again runs out. And this time they bring with them Benjamin. When Joseph sees Benjamin, he's so overcome with emotion that he has to run out of the room to compose himself. And yet even then, he doesn't reveal himself. He puts them to the test. Benjamin is now the favorite brother. Benjamin is now their father's favorite. And so he brings them in and he serves them food. And he gives Benjamin 5 times the portion of all of his brothers. Now, I don't know about you, but I would fight you over that. If anybody's going to eat 5 times the amount of anybody else at the table, it better be me. And he wants to see, are they resentful of Benjamin as they resented me? They leave with their food. Except this time, not only does he put their money back in, he takes his personal ornate silver cup and he puts it in Benjamin's bag. Then he sends his soldiers out to capture them, brings them in. This is what he says. Only the man who is found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back to your father in peace. He is setting up for them to do the same thing. And I think the burning question in Joseph's mind is, will they abandon him? Because let me tell you, if I was in that situation, if I was in like North Korea with my brother and he stole a poster and we get taken in and they're like, well, we're just going to have to hold your brother, I'd be like, peace out, bye, see ya. It was nice knowing you, man. You shouldn't have done it. There's no way. I mean, I'd be so terrified. I don't want to end up in jail. I know what happens to them in these jails. I don't want to be here. Yeah, it was totally him. It was in his bag. I don't even like that bag. All this stuff. You see his clothes right there? And he's waiting for this. But that's not what happens. It was Judah. Judah was the one who came up with the idea to sell him as a slave. Judah speaks up. And he says, it would kill my father to lose another son, not Benjamin, who he loves. If you got to take one of us, take me. So now Joseph gets to see that they've changed. They're not throwing the youngest brother under the bus because dad seems to like him more than all the rest of us. Why does he get this special treatment? Instead, they're willing to offer themselves in his place. So it was that the pastor Gehigi arranged for a way for Rosaria to see that Severi had changed. It was harvest time. And with a hand permanently disabled from the violence done to her body, she was facing a very difficult process, and so coming down the road, she sees Saveri and another former murderer, and they brought with them a dozen people. Think of the workday with Miss Maisie, a dozen people to come and help her finish the harvest of her crop. On her own, the processing would take at least a month, and they do it in a single day. Not only are they doing it, it's especially incredible that they've shown up, because the work they're doing is woman's work in their culture. And yet these men who had brought such harm to her are willing to humble themselves and show up and bring others and do this for her. Let me tell you, this is something I feel is greatly missing in our justice system today. The justice system in our country really just deals with two people, or two sides. The person who did the wrong and the law and the justice system. And then he serves time or a sentence. And what is left out is a chance to make reparations to the person who was wrong. Not that it ever pays back, and of course Saveri doesn't show up and do the work and at the end of the day say, hey, now we're even. But it was a way for him to demonstrate that he had changed. And so I'll say again, if you have wronged someone in a way that is deep and profound, in a way that it's difficult for them to trust you again, you cannot demand their trust. But you can make even a small gesture, a small show of kindness, a way to begin to repay them and express that you have changed. So Joseph gets to see this in his brothers. And again, the whole thing is blind, so it's even more impressive. They're not even doing this to like, oh, Joseph, let me show you, like, hey, I've changed. They have no idea who he is at this point. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. Now you got to understand how terrifying this moment had to be for the brothers. Because up until this point, they're like, man, we are in really big trouble with a really powerful foreign figure. And then they find out it's our brother Joseph who we were really mean to. It would be like you if you got into trouble with the IRS and then the agent shows up to do your audit and it's your ex-wife. And so they're, no! We're all dead! And so Joseph quickly moves to comfort them. And now do not be distressed. And do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here. Because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land. And for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives a great deliverance. Now, Joseph does not minimize what they have done. And sometimes, again, we feel as though expressing forgiveness to someone means saying that what they did was okay. Joseph doesn't say, like, oh yeah, it's totally good. Guys, that was hilarious when you beat me up. And like, oh, I was just so glad to be a slave for all this. No, he says, you sold me. He acknowledges the reality of what they did, and he forgives them for it. Even better, he is finally at that point where he sees what God had accomplished through the pain that was done to him. Now understand, if you're at this point in the beginning of the forgiveness journey, it can be very difficult to see what God could possibly bring about through what another person has done to harm you. But as we journey along, as we get to that point of forgiving them and allowing God to remove that burden from us, it can be incredible how he can take situations that you see no way out. And I'll just tell you, in my own life, as I've shared, struggling with forgiveness with my mom, finally getting to that place where I can look back and say, yes, there were some times that were really horrible. Yes, there was pain that was deep and profound in that sense of abandonment and just a continual renewing of the hurt. But I know that God has used that. He's used that to prepare me to minister to other people in the same situation. He's used that to help me to trust him in new ways. And so Joseph forgives his brothers, but even there it is not done. Sometimes, again, you think you get to that point, and forgiveness with another person, you're like, all right, we're good, we're settled. And then you find yourself, down the road having to revisit the issue again. This happens. Sometime later, Dad dies. And now his brothers are afraid of him. They begin to think maybe Joseph really wanted to kill us, but he didn't want to put Israel through that. He didn't want to do it while he was alive. Now he's dead. What's going to happen to us? Genesis 15:15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? So they fake a message from Israel telling Joseph to forgive him. Sometimes it can be very hard, especially if we're talking about major things. If you forgive someone and it's hard for them to believe it. We usually think about trust going the other way. Like, you've hurt me, it's going to take time, for me to trust you not to hurt me again. But sometimes it's on the other end. Because forgiveness is so abnormal. It goes against our human nature, against our desire to take revenge. And people offer fake forgiveness. Maybe all of us have been through a time where, you go and you apologize to someone and say, oh, I forgive you. And then later on, their behavior clearly indicates they have not forgiven you. And so if you find yourself, in this situation and, you're really needing it, understand that it's something major. For the other person, if they've had other people give them fake forgiveness, you might have to reassure them, really, I'm not going to slash your tires. Really, it's settled. This is what Joseph has to do with his brothers. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Again, I remind you, if you are taking revenge on people, you are putting yourself in God's place. Joseph says, you intended to harm me. Again, I love that he doesn't gloss over it. He doesn't say oh, you guys didn't know what you were doing, or hey, we were young. He said, no, you intended to harm me. But God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. I am so glad that we are given, and I encourage you, read the entire story. We are given chapters and chapters of the struggle leading up to this end point. Don't forget everything that had to take place for him to get to that point. Now Joseph says, he says, not only do I forgive you, I will provide for you and your children. The whole family had moved to Egypt to live with Joseph. He provided them the land. See, sometimes we would think, again, of forgiveness as being like Joseph. He has his brothers before him. He says, look, guys, you tried to kill me. I forgive you for that. Now get out of here. I forgive you. Now here's extra food. I intend to never see you again. I forgive you. Good luck with your life. Instead, he doesn't just send him away with food. He says, I've been given great power and wealth here. I'm going to give you land to live in. Bring everyone. Let me ask you a question. If you won the lottery, which would be surprising because none of you play it, right? If you won the lottery tomorrow more money you could ever spend. Be honest. Are there people in your family that you would like, yeah, I'll give you $20? Be honest with each other this morning. Joseph doesn't do that. He had as much a right as any of us to write his brothers off. He doesn't. He says, not only am I not writing you off, hey, come live with me. Right? If you won the lottery, would you be building a mansion and inviting all of your in-laws to come live with you? At the end of the day, Severian's crew, they finished the work that they did with her crops, and then they began to take her possessions and pack them up. And they all walked with her and her daughter, and they brought her to a village that had just been constructed. And this village is a unique place because it was built for survivors, for refugees of the genocide, and for killers. And they brought her to her new house, whose roof would no longer leak, that had been built brick by Severian, next door to a house he had built for himself. This is what God wants to bring about in our relationships and in your life. Let me tell you, if a genocidal killer can get to that point of living next door to the person he had wronged, how can we settle for so cheap, such stunted relationships that we have? No, look, it's not always possible to get there. If you have one person, it takes both people being willing, and it takes time and effort. If you have somebody who will never even acknowledge the wrong that they've done to you, you're only going to be able to get so far. But I tell you, some of us have no idea the miracles that God desires to work. Because when people walk by that house, you know what they're going to be asking? How? How? You're not killing him. You're not arguing over where the property line divides. How can you do this, Rosario? Severi, why did you do this? And they get to tell them the gospel about a God who so willingly forgives sinners and calls them his own. Because what's amazing about God's forgiveness, there's no journey. There's no process. If you today need forgiveness in your life, you don't have to go on probation with God. You don't have to go through a process of paying him back. God is not like people.